recording. Most of you here, luckily, have you know Dr. Magnuson already. Roy, you've come to Tech 2 times, 3 times at this point, 4 times.
I think 3 times, and then the Houston thing.
Yeah, right. So 3 times tour for the CBDNA. So most of us in here, I think you know this person. This is my friend, a colleague, my collaborator for 15 years at this point. And Roy's an amazing person, amazing composer. I like to think on his short list of bullet points. One of the things I've always found most impressive about Roy is he's the only person I've ever seen make 8 a.m. theory any student's favorite class. So we thought about this, this element of the summer workshops and incorporating some music theory. Immediately, Roy was who I hoped would come and talk to us because, like really nobody else, and all apologies, I've not spent a lot of time observing other theory classes. So I mean, I'm sure theory people, but I just know about Roy, and I knew that he could come here and give us some ideas. And a veteran of wind bands his whole life, a trombone player, and now theory teacher and composer. And I'm looking forward to this hour. So Roy, thanks for joining us.
Of course, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and share, and then we'll get rolling here. So hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. All right, you guys should be able to see a PowerPoint now. So awesome. So yeah, I'll talk to you today about music theory. And right off the bat, just to make something very clear here, this is not going to be a discussion about a curriculum, like what I think you should do. That we can sort of touch on throughout, but I don't think that's a particularly difficult discussion. You guys know generally what theory curriculums look like, and you can Google them or find them, and I'm happy to help you with those too. But I'd rather talk more generally about the concept, like what we're supposed to be doing, how theory works, and then the perspective and sort of the way in which you can shape that for your students in the classroom. So the way I start off all my classes, obviously, is trying to get things defined. You'll see a theme through this also that's going to be about reduction, thinking reductively, getting down to the sort of the lowest common denominator, like the smallest idea, like how can we encapsulate this concept, right? So what is music, right? And these can be rhetorical. If you want to jump in, feel free to. Don't, like, this is not just me yelling it into the void, but these can also just be rhetorical when I ask the question. So what is music, right? So I mean, my personal definition, because I'm a jaded composer, is sound or sounds that one perceives to be organized, which I think is a beautiful academic, sort of antiseptic, dry, emotionless definition, which allows for a lot of flexibility, right? And I'm not saying that like music can't have intrinsic, sort of emotional meaning or anything like that. It absolutely can, and should, frankly. It's just within a definition. I kind of reserve that to another discussion. So what is music theory, right? If music is like, this concept of organization of sounds and perception of sounds and psychoacoustics and all that kind of stuff, music theory, I mean, if you Google it, this is more or less what comes up. So studying the possibilities of music, which I think is actually kind of a cool way to think about it. The way I think of it, yeah, it's like the possibilities. It's really learning an objective language for speaking about music, right? So studying the way that one talks about music, right? Which in a big way, right, is these concepts that I'm sure you're familiar with: intervals, key signatures, scales, harmony, melody, secondary function, German augmented 6 chords, set theory, right? 014s and 012.7s and things that I'm sure like you get a little PTSD when I say them out loud, right? That's all like things that you studied in your collegiate music theory classes, right? Right. So what is music theory, right? It's all these things, right? It's intervals, and it's these, concepts of harmony and concepts of melody, right? That in itself is not music theory, right? And this is the issue, right? It's probably best referred to as pre-theory, I think. And that's our problem, right? That what we're dealing with is actually not even really the core of what we're supposed to be teaching, or the end goal, what the mission should be. So the problem, right, is that we spend our entire time teaching a language we never get to actually use. And when I say we, I mean me as well. And I'll say we a lot. It's not just the sort of like projection we on people that are teaching in the public schools. I struggle with these things all the time as a collegiate teacher, that we spend so much time beating these things into students' heads, and then we're out of time, right? The class is over, you go into another class, and then that's it, right? You never talk about the nuance of a German six in Beethoven versus the nuance of a German six in Mozart, or someone else, right? What do? Right? Well, there's no shortcut here, right? I'm not saying that you should not teach the language. You have to teach the language, right? It is a language. There's no shortcut, and it's not fast or cool or particularly sexy to do it any other way. It takes time, and it seems like work to the students, right, to teach these concepts that are necessarily at times being taught in isolation. And it seems like work because it's hard to get them excited about it. It's hard to get you excited about the application of something like that, because it is work, right? It's challenging. Some of these things are hard. So what I want to do is talk about some sort of like meta points with you, about just like the concept of theory and how one can go about sort of wrapping their head around it, and then show you a couple examples of ways that I teach things, that you could teach things, and then just open up for a discussion. There should be about 25 minutes or so at the end. We're going to chat like about questions about things, or if you want to go in a particular direction, or you have a question about curriculum or whatever. And as Dan said, I mean, you can jump in at any point. Like if you have a question, or you want me to go back on something, or pause, or whatever, just absolutely just shout out. That's totally fine. Okay, so some meta thoughts about teaching music, from my understanding as a collegiate theory instructor, and how you guys can incorporate this. So first off, right, simple concepts to complex concepts, right? This as an idea is not that complicated, right? And this is absolutely what you guys do, right? I know you do this when you're working with younger students and you move them through high school, right? It's simple to complicated. Like any language, the language that we're discussing for theory, it's just tons of small rules, like over and over again, right? And if you think of a parallel of music theory to teaching Spanish or French or Latin or something like that, right? My experience in French and taking Spanish in college is that, you learn these like basic concepts, right? You learn about, the sounds and the pronunciation things, but you spend a ton of time on like, what is a past participle? Like, what is present progressive form? What is this? And that's important, right? Because you can't go on to having the conversational things about, understanding some context. The issue with music is that they, students, us as humans, you've been hearing these things forever, right? It's like you're a native speaker, and then all of a sudden you started like diagramming sentences, right? You understand these concepts, so use your ear, right? Go to the strength of the student, that they get what a dominant chord is, if you want to go so far as to teaching that concept, because they understand that must go to one, right? You can hear it, right? It's something that you're hearing on Sesame Street when you're 2 or something. It's not in any way foreign. The concept of calling it a dominant chord is foreign, right? But that's also not the hard part of the theoretical study, and that's what we'll kind of get to. Again, simple concepts to complex concepts, right? This is basically what I teach, like for all of my core curriculum, is to teach music to see music, or teach students to see music and then hear music. And that's it, right? That is in its core, the core curriculum of a collegiate like theory oral skills curriculum. In fact, like just for oral skills, if you guys have taken that in college, right? You practice sight singing, right? So that you can look down at a piece of music and you can hear it and then audio it, right? Make it come out. And you take away your instrument because you have to like really internalize the pitch, right? And sing. That has the balance in an oral skills class, right? Of like doing dictation or something like that, right? Where you can hear the music, like someone talking, or rather someone like playing piano, right? And then you can close your eyes and write it down and dictate it, right? It's not because you want to train students to be professional dictators, right? Because we have algorithms that do that. They don't have to be good at it, but the thing that they're learning to be good at will make them a better musician, and it creates that feedback loop. The idea of what we're doing is just thinking and listening, right? What I just talked about, the see music, hear music, is really like the listening portion, right? The thinking portion is music theory, that you can think about music, and then as you listen to music and do this like seeing, hearing kind of like thing that you're working on as a musician, that listening makes you think about it differently, and then you think about it as you're listening to it, right? And you create this continual feedback loop of understanding. That in itself is like super not complicated, right? It's just you think about music and you listen to it and you listen and you think. I'm teaching, actually just kind of like anecdotally, I'm teaching a music appreciation class right now online for non-majors. So it's like, 62 like athletes and people that are really not interested in taking the music appreciation class online over the summer. But actually one of the assignments I have them do is basically this, like to pick a piece of music that they really enjoy, to listen to it like 7 times in a row and concentrate on a different element of the texture each time and then journal about it. And it sounds really silly, but the vast majority of the students write back with, and this might just be them being nice to me, but they write back usually saying, this really like messed with my head. Like this was really profoundly strange and interesting because it made them think about music differently. Again, concept, not that complicated. It's when we start to add the variables that things get a little sideways. So for example here, like the simplicity thing, scales. How do you teach students scales, right? Thinking back to 5th grade trombone, I remember sitting in holding my trombone, I got it together, right? And then you play an F in first position, and then you slowly like go down and you're playing like chromatic descent or something. And then you start practicing these patterns, right? Right. Well, fundamentally, right, what are scales? And this is that reductive way of thinking again, right? That scales are at their core just a collection of pitches that we experience linearly, right? And that's really important, right? That collection of pitches that we experience linearly, we have names for, right? And they're colloquial in the sense that we have this sort of like major sounds happy, minor sounds sad. And then there are forms of minor, if you want to, go so far as to think about them having different identities, right? Like a harmonic minor scale or melodic minor scale, natural minor scale, the parallel modes, this whole half, like organization of the intervallic material in a major scale, right? That's all good, right? But thinking reductively and being even more like get down to the core, right? What are scales? Well, scales are representation of key signatures that are organized linearly. Okay, they are that intervallic stuff, right? But really, what they're showing us is that there's hierarchy, and that one note is more important than the other, and that note that's more important, right, is creating this idea of centricity. There's a center. And that center in a major scale would be do or home, which is tonic. That centricity means that, like, based on the music that we listen to as Western listeners, primarily derived from Bach, that center, do, sounds complete and it sounds stable, right? And it has this like paradigm with, with the dominant, right? It has this conflict with dominant. That is what we hear, right? When you hear a scale, you don't hear the intervallic material. You hear center, you hear a collection, you hear the linear organization, you hear a key signature kind of wrapped up in a set of notes that sound like a ladder, right? That continue in a pattern. Okay, that is how you should teach it. right? I talk to my students a lot about this. Like they'll come in from, taking AP music theory or high school theory or piano. A lot of them learn theory and piano, and they'll talk about learning their scales. Like, oh, I go through and I do all the intervals, right? And then I ask them, okay, I'll play a scale on the piano really fast and say, what did you hear? And they'll say, I heard a scale. And they'll say, did you hear intervals? And they'll say, no. And I said, stop thinking about it like that, right? It's a way to conceive of it, but it's not the easiest way. So key signatures, right? This is getting even more reductive. So those are scales, but actually below that is this idea of key signatures. Key signatures are not hard at all. And I know we all know that, right? But I have probably 20 sophomores that still, it's like, all right, how many flats are in G flat major? And I just like stare at the wall. It's like, guys, there's like literally nothing hard about this, right? And I make a big point about this when I'm teaching, like that there are things that are profoundly difficult in what we teach and what we do as musicians. Usually they're synthesis based or like, application based, right? Key signatures are not hard, just memorize them, right? There's not that many of them. Make some flashcards, grab an app, right? And memorize them because, right? This concept is our periodic table, right? This is what our music is, all of it, right? And even when you get out of like traditional diatonicism and you get into like chromatic music, you start looking at Wagner or something, it's all it is like tiny little micro universes of diatonicism that are strung together more frequently, like changing universes, right? But everything can be understood from this concept of sort of centricity and focus. And I tell my students, like, can you even imagine studying chemistry, right? And not memorizing the periodic table? Can you imagine like sitting down, even in chemistry 101, right? Your first like majors class as a chemist, and sitting down and then putting something in front of you, and the expectation is, you know, the periodic table, right? You know the K is potassium, right? Because you can't talk about your major without it. That, for whatever reason, is not the case with being a music major. And maybe you guys we could talk about this at the end, maybe. I'm like legitimately curious about that. I have this theory about, students that decide to be music majors and want to go on and study or be performers or something, that their success in professional music correlates to their wanting to or understanding that they should know these fundamental concepts when they declare a major. That makes sense? Like the idea being, I don't think you would sign up to be a chemistry major if you didn't have interest in the periodic table, but you can be a music major and not read bass clef or know what key signatures are, right? Which seems weird to me. So yeah, this is the reductive thing. This is it. I tell my students, like, memorize your key signatures and they will set you free, because yeah, like you could talk about scales like this, right? That's an E flat major scale, but it's organized in a way that no one actually hears it, right? It's objective, it's empirically correct, right? It's, yes, those are the things. It's whole steps and half steps. And it's important, like in a fundamental way, to be able to zoom in and talk about music as a collection of major and minor, half steps or steps, semitones. But again, in no way the way I would teach this concept to students. Teach it like this, right? What's the key signature of E flat major? And you snap your finger and point at Kevin and say, what is it? And Kevin says, 3 flats. You say, great. Put 3 flats on a treble clef, right? Now write E to E. That's an E flat major scale. There you go, right? Because not only is that like literally an E flat major scale, but it's what you hear. Right? When you hear that, you're hearing E flat major, right? And you don't need to know like what the pitch is, like have perfect pitch. I certainly don't have perfect pitch, but you hear the collection and the representation of the key signature as opposed to the intervallic material. Again, especially when you get to more advanced theory stuff, it's important to be able to zoom in and say F to G is a major second, it's 2 semitones, right? Because that's important. It's fundamentally like empirically true, but when you're teaching the concept, it's not like necessary at all. So intervals and chords, right? The next kind of thing, right? Well, you take your E flat major scale and you make little snowmen on all of them and you get the diatonic triads. There's your diatonicism, right? It's Lean on Me. It's like a billion songs, right? We write a ton of music with these triads, right? again, it's really easy. If you just stack up thirds like this, you get the diatonic collection. The 1 chord will be major, the 2 is minor, the 3 is minor, the 4 is major, major, minor, diminished, major. And that pattern will be true for any key signature, F sharp major, G triple flat major, it doesn't matter, right? The same concept. And to parallel the scale thing, this is how I was taught, how to make a major triad, right? In high school, I was the one kid in my high school that would always sign up for music theory and it would never be offered. So I literally, this is how geeky I was. I went and got a theory textbook. I bought it on this new website called Amazon, and started taking theory lessons from the community college theory teacher who lived in our town. And this is how I learned, it's major third, minor third, perfect fifth, major chord, right? The problem with that is, again, empirically true, it's 3 ways for you to make a mistake, right? There are 3 different ways that you could fail, and it's not how you hear it. If you went over and banged out an E flat major chord on the piano, no one's gonna say, ooh, perfect fifth, major third, minor third. They're gonna say, sounds happy, right? And that's it, right? You should teach it. That is the concept of E flat major. It's stacking up thirds on an E flat. There you go, right? Again, you can get reductive and go in and look at that and think, okay, cool, what is that dyad? What is that dyad? Combine them, right? And that's totally fine. But as a more meta, broader concept, it's not necessary. So this is how I teach intervals, right? Instead of going in and counting 4 half steps there, which is fine, and memorizing a keyboard, you just think, oh, in the major key of that root, which is E flat, so E flat up to G, is there a G in the key of E flat major? Yeah, right? There's a B flat, E flat, A flat, and everything else is natural. So that's a major third, right? And it works for other ones too, right? If there's a G and you think, oh, in G minor, is there a B flat? Yeah, if you know that G minor is 2 flats, you're totally fine. You don't have to count that that's a minor third by thinking 3 half steps. You just think, oh, B flat's in the key of G minor. In the same way that if this were chromatic, right? Say that we're a B natural there. You just think, oh, is there a B natural in the key of G minor? No. Is there a B natural in the key of G major? Yes, it's a major third. And then all you need to know is your key signatures. That's it. So if you know your key signatures and you can count to 8, right, you can do diatonic intervals. And then compound intervals are just the same thing, right? You're just subtracting 7 from everything forever. Again, super simple, and removes a lot of possibility for error. You don't have to be doing these finicky kind of things. I do tell my students and that I completely understand the reason why things are taught like that in high school. We're taught like that when pre-theory is being introduced, maybe in piano lessons or something when you're 6 or 7, because it's very much so like high school curriculum. It's like a math class. It's it's objective. It's a major third is 4 of these, right? And that's easy, right? It's easy to pass on to a kid. It's easy to get them confident with. It's easy to check right and wrong. It's easy to grade, all that stuff. But it has nothing to do with what we do, at all, with music or anything. It has nothing to do with how we hear music, and it therefore doesn't really serve a purpose outside of, spending time objectively thinking about music, which I guess is meaningful, but it's not moving towards any kind of end analytical goal. Oh yeah, other than, I'll go back really fast. Other than augmented and diminished intervals, right? Forgot, that's another issue, and we could talk about that later if you want, how to get students to think about augmented and diminished. I have this whole continuum theory about intervallic material, which I'll say this at the end too. If you want any other material, just let me know. I've got hundreds of worksheets and just stuff I'm happy to share with you guys, or syllabi or whatever, if you're trying to think of how to implement these things in a more objective kind of procedural way. That's not really what I wanted to talk about today, because I think it's a little more dry. But I say that kind of tongue-in-cheekly. It's a little more dry than talking about just what's a major third, which is objectively boring.
I'll jump in there, everybody, and I'll speak for everybody and say I guarantee you we'd be interested in that material. I think in a normal instance we probably would be. looking down the barrel of a at least hybrid semester, the way things look right now. Material like this might be more important than ever. And so if it's something that we can link to the webpage later on, you know, to a Dropbox or something like that, or a Google Drive, I know I'd be interested in it. Again, just because I don't think any of us honestly believe we're going to start school next month and go straight on through the fall semester without some kinds of virtual interruptions this semester.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat too. Yeah, I have like a pre-theory book I've kind of made because I taught an introductory music class at Illinois State for a couple of years, and it's, if you're talking to students, that really you have to establish a baseline, like from zero, right? I think that would work pretty well. Just this is treble clef, bass clef, teaching.
Well, I mean, I have to jump in again. I mean, guys, Roy's really humble. I mean, he's talking kind of flippantly about this pre-music class. I mean, that was the result of a couple of years while I was on the faculty at Illinois State of debate about how to have better outcomes with our freshman music majors than the prototypes, throwing them into the deep end of theory class and history and piano. And Roy, at least my recollection, correct me if I'm very, very wrong here, but I know that most, by far, the heavy lifting with all that ended up with you, and that pre-music class that you're talking about, at last I was aware, was really making a very, very positive sea change in those outcomes. And as I recall, the idea really was, hey, this is the beginning is this is a treble clef, and this is a bass clef, and going from literally the ground up.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea is, I mean, and you guys, I'm sure see this too, you get tons of talented musicians in your band, but you've got a really talented flute player who's just been focusing on playing the flute, just like you have a really talented baseball player that plays baseball 9 months a year. Like, they don't have like basketball. Like, so why would you expect them to be able to do that? So yeah, we get, you know, we'll recruit a really great flute player at ISU or at Tech or something, but they've never read bass clef. Like, they don't know. It doesn't mean they're a bad musician, but they need like a baseline. They need like, okay, everybody, here's the box, you know, and then you start. Because again, instead of what Dan was saying, we used to just kick them to the wolves and just say, good luck, you know. And then there was a lot of flame out, right? Students just get lost, and this is
yeah. I'm sure a lot of people here right now just remember that, they dealt with that themselves. You know. The iconic tuba teacher at Illinois State was named Larry Livingston, and Rex Martin was his prize student, taught at Northwestern until he retired many, many years ago. Many years at Northwestern, retired not so long ago. But one of Ed Livingston's favorite stories about Rex, he's one of the most talented tuba players, obviously, to ever walk the halls, couldn't get through freshman theory. Michael Colgrass, the Pulitzer Prize winning composer that just passed away, legendarily couldn't get through University of Illinois theory class until people found a way to drag him through. It has nothing to do with talent in so many cases. It's about preparation and some study skills, and, you know, and getting out of bed for 8 o'clock class.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it, right? Is making it somewhat enticing. So yeah, absolutely. So I can certainly send that little book, and then if there's like a specific concept or something you find yourself like trying to introduce or something, I'm sure I have a worksheet for it or something where I can point you. Or if you're trying to get a textbook, you know, going, you know, for a theory class, I can walk you through those, because we've basically surveyed everything that's out there.
Yeah, as I said, I hate to interrupt, but I had to drill down on that for a second. I mean, that's going to be huge right now. I mean, I know we're all really struggling to try to find a way that virtual band can be engaging and productive in any way this semester beyond go listen to this YouTube recording of Lincolnshire Posey and write me a book report.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not going to do it.
Yeah. Especially if they don't have a language for it. I mean, like, they can talk about what they liked or whatever.
Right.
You can lead them, but it's going to be hard for them to speak objectively and eloquently, I suppose, instead of, wow, that trombone player is really good, you know? Yeah,
I didn't like the oboes.
Right. I mean, that's understandable, but like, you know, yeah.
There's not enough of them, that's all.
Right. That's exactly it. There needs to be at least 6 for Granger. Yeah. So yeah, just let me know and we can chat about that at the end too. let's see, part writing, right? Which is obviously something a lot of us have spent time with in college. So if you're thinking about teaching it in high school, just don't teach it. Just don't do it. In fact, I'm beating the drum whenever anyone will listen that I think we should just burn it down and get it out of our curriculum. That isn't to say it's not teachable, it's not important. I think if you want to be a composer or a theorist, you absolutely need to study SATB part writing, which is really just watered down 18th century part writing, looking at Bach's music and stuff like that, and the linear understanding of that. It's all really important. But it ends up being about 60% of our curriculum at this point because, you know, historically it came about in the 60s, came to really be a big deal in the 60s because we needed something to teach students that would get at a lot of things that was super objective and easy to grade because the baby boomers all went to college and all of a sudden there's 100 music majors at the University of Michigan. And it's like, what the hell do we do with them in theory? So we developed this curriculum that was easy to kind of, you know, teach and get a lot of objective data from. It's really flawed for a general education program. But it's sort of the, you know, the issue is we can't not teach it because everyone expects you know it. So until everyone kind of gets together at the table and says, yeah, we're not going to test anyone on that anymore, and it's not as important to our curriculum anymore, we're still going to be stuck in that cycle. So I say all of this, if you're teaching students about theory and any of them have any inclination of going to college for theory, they will be tested on it. And obviously, like, you don't want to set them up to fail. But if you're just trying to look at a general education thing, you know, teaching that a dominant seventh has a leading tone in the seventh they need to resolve up and down it's fine. Really, I would spend your time with more like sort of the macro kind of things and building a language. There's a lot of ways to do what part writing does. And these could be really interesting things for you to do remotely because I think they're all totally possible. You can reverse engineer music by just copying music. And this is something that David Mazanka talked about a lot. I had the great fortune of being able to study with him a bit, know him pretty well. And he, you know, was a much younger composer. I was probably 20 or so when I was talking to him, 21. I was chatting with him about how I was copying out the flute solo to Prelude to the Afternoon of the Fawn. And I was, you know, kind of like, I don't know, bragging a little bit. I was like, yeah, you know, I wrote it out. I was copying that. I was trying to study some Debussy. And he sort of like patted me on the head and said, oh, good job. And then, you know, I said, oh, I'd really love to, I don't know, like write a piece by hand. I'd love to make like a handwritten score. And he looked at me and said, literally, what do you have to do that is more important than doing that? And I said, yeah, that's a good point. Because his point is he, you know, went to college for music and studied music and theory, taught theory. And he said over and over again, one of the ways that he learned about composing and orchestration and just theory in general is by being the copyist for H. Owen Reed and just having to write his music out. And H. Owen Reed's terrific. He's a great composer, right? Well, if you got to copy that music out and make scores of it, just literally hand copy it, then you're going to think about what you're doing and you're going to absorb something. And that's profoundly important. So it's like a kind of thing to think about, like not as a punishment, but like you can shape it to students to say, hey, you know, here's some manuscript paper, here's this duet, right? Copy these out and then give them some guidance. Like what is happening here? You know, circle it, really slow their thought process down, which is one of the beautiful things about theory. You have to think about music in a sort of vacuum, slowed down, alinearly, like objectively. Micro composition assignments are also great, that you can have these tiny little guided focus composition things where you are teaching harmony, you're teaching counterpoint, you're teaching orchestration, all the things you would do in SATB, you know, counterpoint, but you're doing it in a much more interesting way. And then if you have the capacity to do reading sessions of those, one of the beauties of theory as an academic class is really only understood if you look at how it started. So in the 40s, the concept of music theory as a college class became popularized at Eastman. And this is so cool. Like this class sounds awesome. They created a class where you would study music theory and the objectives of music, and they would put you in classes of 15, and they would choose you to be in the classes based on your instrumentation. And then you guys would sing and play with your instruments all of the music. And it's like, that's freaking great. Like that class sounds awesome, but it's impossible now, right? Because of how big the classes are, right? The lack of homogeneity, right? You've got 20 sopranos and 2 tuba players in your class because of the luck of the draw of just how they signed up for the classes, right? But in like a band curriculum or an orchestra curriculum, you can maybe artificially create that in some way. You can pair people off and create little subgroups and just have them play the music. You just try to play it, even if it's like a complete, disaster. It will like completely transform the thing. They realize it's not a Sudoku puzzle that they were doing. It's actually music, right? And to provide lots of limitations for any of these. So this is an example of like the homework assignments I can share with you guys. This is from a class that I've taught called Music 220, which is called Analysis Through Composition. And this is we call our 5th semester class at ISU. So students at this point have actually done all of the theory curriculum. So they've taken advanced chromatic harmony, set theory, all that stuff. These are first semester juniors taking theory. And this class specifically is designed so that people can think about theory through the opposite end. Like they reverse engineer it with composing. So they're writing music using the knowledge or trying to use the knowledge, apply the knowledge. This is an assignment I've given where, it's the first couple bars of a famous piano piece. It's Stravinsky. Stravinsky. There we go. And this is how I would, kind of phrase it to them, like explain this to me, right? Very open-ended, but it's, what do you see and what does it mean, right? Well, what do you see? Well, I would hope at that point, at least for a student, and you could lead them through this, like as the teacher, right? That, the right hand is F minor. Go and play it at the piano, right? It's gonna sound sad. And the left hand is F major-ish, which is actually F Lydian. So you could maybe say, oh, it kind of looks like F major, but there's a B natural, right? And you say, oh, that's super cool. Well, what is that? Why is that there? And that could maybe be like a discussion of just like, hey, there are these mode things. And that is enough to think like, okay, cool. Like you can wrap your head around the main characteristic. And that is the entire piece. If you look at it, that it's just bimodal. It's 2 hands, 2 modes. That's it. And then here's the 3rd and 5th measures of the piece. What do you think the 4th measure is, right? And to write it here. So this is a treble clef and bass clef, treble bass. Take a shot at the middle of that. Try to stitch them together. This as a concept, just like that activity, is so rewarding and interesting, I think, because you could do this for like 10 years and your 4th bar is never going to be better than Stravinsky's. Ever. And a more extreme version of this, because this is a little like, you could do some kind of wacky things because we're talking, 20th century music. But if you went to like Mozart, who I think a lot of people kind of disparage a little bit and think, oh, his music's so childish, it's so antiseptic and like, it's dry, whatever. Go and take the first 4 bars of a Mozart sonata you don't know. Don't look at the next 4 bars. Write out the first 4 bars and then try to write out the next 4 bars. For your entire life, you will never write 4 bars that are better than the Mozart. And it will always be simpler and better. Like it's freaky good. It's just a great like kind of learning experience, right? And these are sorts of things I think would work pretty well remotely because you could talk to the students about like, yeah, you're applying the knowledge and you're copying stuff out and you're practicing manuscript, right? And you could incorporate some of the like the more theoretical things in here. Like I said, here there's motivic unity. Motives, just like how are the characters being used. This is pretty clearly canonic, right? They're sort of staggering each other like that. Again, not necessarily concepts you have introduced with your students, but that's sort of, choose your own adventure, sort of leading them through discovery. And then saying, okay, cool. This piece is 18 measures long. Based on what you've seen, write the last 2 bars. Okay, and then you show it to them. And then you listen to it, and then you study it. Then you start digging into the theory of it, like the analysis. That sort of I think as a concept is more rewarding than saying, here's this piece by Stravinsky, here's this piece by Granger, here's this piece, whatever, right? And then just slamming it on them and saying, okay, let's listen to it and write a book report, which is important, right? That's a literature kind of based approach. But yeah, it can be a little, I don't know, it has a time and a place, but can be kind of alienating, or students can be a little discouraged by it potentially. Couple other sort of meta thoughts. As Dan kind of said at the beginning, students rarely willingly sign up to study theory. That's one of the things that I find most challenging with teaching collegiate theory, and you'll certainly find it introducing theory and teaching theory in high school, that very few students say, wow, this is great, because it's obtuse and it's alienating a lot of times. It's you signed up to play the clarinet because you wanted to make beautiful music, right? And here you are talking about bass clef augmented intervals. It's like, what the hell am I doing, right? Why is this why is this happening? And that thing is not a distraction from performance. It's very easy, and I totally acknowledge this. It's easy for me to say that teaching theory in high school shouldn't be a distraction from performance, because I don't have to be the one that answers to the parents or the school board or the principal if you don't get a 1 at contest, right? That you have to balance that sort of stuff, and that's really important. That it should create symbiosis, right? It should make your performance better. There's some sort of like cost benefit analysis that has to go in. Like, you can't rehearse, you only get them for 50 minutes a day or something, right? You can't rehearse because you're talking about theory. How do I use that effectively to make the end product better, right? Is tricky, and we can, again, go into that in more depth if you want.
Speaking of how,
yes.
I thought you made an interesting comment a little while ago. You said, in regard to having some kind of repertoire listening assignments or things that might come to fruition here, how difficult that is for students in particular when they don't, we haven't given them any tools or skill set to even respond critically. And any thoughts to how we might build a vocabulary for them, or in the lack of a better term, I guess, any taste at all, and not to go down a big giant rabbit hole, but I mean, we're all bred and trained that just Lincolnshire poesy is great. Well, why?
Right.
Is it great because the old men told us it was great and we were supposed to click our heels and say, yep, okay, great, it's great. And do you put the second movement on your drive home from work because you really want to listen to it?
I have not, but yeah.
How's that work?
Yeah, I mean, for me, if I were teaching something like that to students that didn't have objective knowledge, I would make it as objective and handholdy as possible. So you give them, you severely limit their response, right? So you lead them through it, and it's almost paint by numbers. Like, the outcome of what they're going to say, right? You don't say, what do you like about this, right? You say,
and some of our recent students are here, and I think some of them might have been with us at the banquet when you made that fabulous presentation that I'll brutally boil down here for some folks that weren't. Roy has a brilliant TED Talk, basically breaking down the concept that that one can't create anything until one understands they can't create everything. And so if we gave the students the second movement, just said, what do you think? Well, to a degree, that's debilitating. I don't know what is right to say or not to say, and we'll get responses like, well, I don't like it. Or I think it's the greatest thing I ever heard, both of which aren't very useful kinds of comments. But if we created not necessarily multiple choice, but almost, in terms of ways that they could respond, I think that's what you mean. And that would resonate with me to a degree. That TED Talk again reminds me of the mistake a lot of us make when teaching jazz ensemble. We get a rhythm section cooking and we tell a kid, good luck, play anything you want.
Right.
The odds are 0 that they'll play anything any good right out of the
Right.
chute because they have too many choices, as
Right.
opposed to the great jazzers, educators out there that understand. Give them two notes and two rhythms to begin with.
Right.
You can play C and G, and you can use quarter notes or eighth notes, and that's it. And if you do that, a kid can have some success. But they can't
Yeah.
do anything that sounds bad, frankly. They can't do
Right.
anything that sounds bad. So they won't walk out of it hurt like some students do. They feel, like they failed so immediately. Like some of our students might feel if we asked them to get Stravinsky and listen to it, which I know you didn't mean specifically. But one of the things that I understand and remember about your teaching, Roy, that I always found so inspiring is the way that you found examples in popular music that resonate with the students to demonstrate music theory concepts.
Mhm. Yeah, I do that a lot. Partly, honestly, to keep myself entertained in a way, because it's like it gets really boring, right? To use the same Chopin example or the same Mozart example. It's like, oh my God, like this is we're just talking about 1, 4s, and 5s. Like go listen to the radio and, oh, that's basically Mozart, right? And then just show them the parallels, right? That harmonically they're very similar. Obviously, they're extraordinarily different in like counterpoint and texture and stuff like that. But yeah, you could do that kind of stuff. And all of this, right? Like the discussion of here's Lincolnshire Posy, listen to it, it sounds good, bad, question mark, give me 500 words or something. The reality is that to create the assignment that I think is going to be effective is a hell of a lot of work for the teacher, because you're going to have to think through like the sort of cascading options of like where it could go, right? The good news is I think you'll, one, get a much better response. Like if you say, hey, Lincolnshire Posy, look at this element of it. Okay, listen to that. Okay, now listen to this. Now look at these two notes, right? What's this note? What's this note? And that's like the binary, like, multiple choice. Okay, take these two notes. Now look at the scale. What do you see here? Like at that point, begin to like open it up and let them think, okay, what is, oh, that's a major scale. Like then they can start to apply it. And then you can think, okay, based on that, why did this music sound this way? Oh, it sounded happy or sad or whatever, right? As opposed to, what are your feelings, right? And it's a balancing act. Like you want to do that. Like you definitely want to say, like, how does this music impact you? What was beautiful about this? Because it is. But I think it is just too, I don't know, the students, they're not going to feel good, like you said, like doing that. They're going to feel like they're grasping at straws or they're doing something that's directionless and dismissive or something like that. And it's really not, it's anything but that. You're just trying to get around the fact that you can't talk to them about, dissonant textures or timbral consonants or like stuff that like they can't, it requires too much time, like establishing, right? One of these things that this, having taught music theory pedagogy now to graduate students, that I absolutely, it has become clear to me, is that overcoming insecurities in knowledge is really important. And this came out of teaching a graduate ped class to our online music education master's students. So it's just like, 15 or so people that are out doing their thing, being choir directors, band directors. And the conversation went like this, basically. Why did you take theory? Me. Them. I have no idea. Do you use theory? No. Do you understand or remember anything from your theory class? No, not really. And that they only really discovered it because they had to take an entrance exam for the class I was teaching, right? So it's that like sort of, made some alarms go off in my mind that one, like the way that we teach it in college is flawed because we get them through it as like a sophomore and then they have 2 more years and they go out and start doing all the stuff that they're signed up to do, right? They're going out and they're teaching lessons or whatever, and then they're out teaching and they're fighting for their lives, like to just like get through the curriculum, right? And then we're asking them to still remember how a German 6 resolves. It's just insane, right? And then they sort of self-fulfilling prophecy don't talk about theory because they've forgotten it and they feel insecure and they don't remember it, so they don't want to talk to their students about it. They don't want to look down at the music and say, I think that's a dominant 7th chord at a half cadence, but I don't really know. I don't know if I'm transposing that right. Whatever, I won't mention it. Right. And that's basically what all of them said, which is like my fault, our fault. But the thing I would say is like, just go for it. Like talk to the students about it. And if you fail, if you say something that's wrong, say, it's wrong. That's okay. And then talk about like why you were wrong, right? And what you were thinking and how that, sort of happened. I do that like a lot in my teaching. I find myself being really scared and timid and wanting to go down a rabbit hole or talk about something because I think I'm going to make a mistake. And then I make a mistake, but then demonstrate the failing, right? And to own it and set up an environment where you can do that with your students, I think is important. It's really hard, like personally and psychologically, to make yourself kind of raw and false, like, fallible, I guess, in front of kids. And I'm sure it's dramatically different in front of 14-year-olds. So I'm absolutely like, I have a different situation, but I know my theory ped students, my master's students that were concerned with that. So it's something to keep in mind. Again, do not be afraid to literally copy music. That's how theory was taught early 19th century. It's just like, as a concept, didn't exist, and people just absorbed it by copying, by learning, performing. And then we slowly kind of built up this idea of like, oh, these are Roman numerals and they have function, and like just by looking at patterns and sort of stylistic traits and all that kind of stuff. Be honest with your limitations, both to yourself and your students, kind of going back to the failure thing, that you could talk about this stuff. Like, you guys know more than your students about music theory. And that means you could teach it, right, for sure. But teach it within your own limitations, because it will be the death of your curriculum if you don't, right? In the same way, resist the urge to think you're merely teaching testable material, right? Music theory is not a collection of things that need to be learned. It's again, we're generally talking about pre-theory, because the concept of theory, right, is this more, I don't know, just like argumentative and prosaic, like discussion about music. So to talk to them about that, because if you don't, it will be the death of your curriculum, because it's not going to go anywhere. You're going to get students that are just like ticked off or confused or alienated. Why am I learning this? Like, I don't need to know bass clef, I play the flute. Like, well, you do, because, and there's like 90 steps, right? But to always talk about like where you're going and how the application happens and the subjectivity of it. The example I use a lot in class is that for my doctoral defense, I had to analyze some Prokofiev piece. I can't remember what it was, but they locked me in a room, for like 2 days, and I was analyzing music. And I went to my defense and sat down at the table, and Steve Taylor, who's the composition professor at U of I, said, okay, I think it is absolutely terrifying that you think this piece is in E minor. And I said, all right, let's go. And it was like that was music theory. Like, it was this argument I was trying to make with them, that this is why I heard this music the way I heard it. And he might be right. I mean, like, I didn't get to listen to it, which is one thing, right? I could play it on the piano, but I'm not a piano player. But the point is that, like, it was about that moment. Like, that was music theory. That was the thing I was building towards as a student, to be able to have that argument with someone and make a compelling argument about the way I'm hearing or how I would perform the piece or whatever.
Roy,
Yeah.
Kendall Tabor
Yeah.
has raised his hand in the chat.
Hello.
I'm trying to unmute you. There he is. Kendall,
Hello.
question?
Yes,
Hello.
Dr. Magnuson, thank you so much for sharing all your materials. I threw in there, for just FYI for my fellow band directors, the things that I have taught over my 31 years of teaching music theory in public school and at the Arkansas Tech band camps. I use a G major music theory. That's by Dr. Gilbert D. Benedetti from University of Pittsburgh. These are free resources online. And then the other thing that Dr. Belanger was alluding to was that we've had to do a thing called AMI, alternative means of instruction. That was our, either online or handwritten or printed out teaching lessons that we've done in Arkansas the last few months.
Mm-hmm.
And I used a thing, believe it or not, from Australia. It's called musicfun.net.au. and it has things from the other one has things from basic theory, introductory theory, up to, oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying this, Shankarianus and pre-Shankarianus. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Dear God, that brings back awful thoughts. Sorry, I went down a rabbit hole. Anyway, the other one is musicfun.net.au, and it has literally hundreds. That's what I base my alternative means of instruction on. It has hundreds and hundreds, and it has what we were under the gun. How are you going to design a worksheet that has only 4 or 5 questions? They specifically said that. Right. Well, when I opened that up, that's what it is.
That's great.
Yeah, so yeah. It works great. So just wanted to throw that in there. Sorry, but thank you so much again for your presentation.
Oh, thank you. No, that sort of stuff is great. I mean, there's tons of resources out there. The wading through it is the trickiest part. There's just like lots of stuff. So yeah, finding things that resonate and are applicable to your students might take some time, but I'm glad you were able to do that. And actually segues really well into this. This is just the last thing I had, which is, if you want objective plans, syllabi materials, just ask. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you. I'm sure Dan, has the pulse of people around you guys, the other universities and things like that, that are, equally interested and sort of helpful, because there are materials out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. The issue is you just don't want to run into the curriculum, just blind, right? And just say, wow, I learned it like this. Let's go. Let's just start with STP counterpoint, right? There's a lot of just some nuance you can have there. Yeah, are there any other questions? I think 5 minutes or so. I'm not sure what the transition is, Dan, from one to the other.
It's real subtle.
Okay.
Yeah. Gretchen's here and she's ready to go whenever, but there's certainly no rush. And it would be wonderful if there's any further questions or points that folks want to discuss before we finish for the afternoon with Dr. Magnuson. One of the things, again, I'll speak for Dr. Magnuson. I know him so well over these years. He will be absolutely consistent with just everyone else we've had present this summer in the way that this is, not at all meant to have been a 1-hour presentation and then, goodbye and good luck. Roy, if you want in the chat, maybe pop an email address.
Yep. For
folks to stay in touch, whether we're in as the title implied, traditional modality, that's a word I'm sure none of us want to hear again very soon, that found into my language, modality. Here, whether we're teaching band the way we thought we would, or however this will be dictated in the future. I know that Roy'd be happy to help. He always is. Whether anyone's got any specific questions right now or down the road. So I don't see any other raised hands or anything like that, or anybody wants to just unmute themselves and jump on in. If that's the case, then Roy, we can let you go for the afternoon with just once again our gratitude for making the time with us. And again, long term, what we'll all do here, arm in arm, to try to deliver some music education to these kids who need it just as much as they ever have, if not more. Even though the circumstances are making it, more difficult than we ever imagined.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. Just let me know.
Yeah. Well, thanks, my friend. Great to see your face and hear your voice.
Yep. Good to see you too.
Yeah, we all appreciate it.
Cool. Bye, guys.